the circumstances, but we must all carry on. But thank you very much for allowing me to come to your group today and give a presentation. I'm going to do a PowerPoint, so let's see if I can get this thing to share. There you go. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you all today is about this notion about the university being mismanaged. And when you ask people what do they mean by that, no one seems to be really able to give you an idea what it is that they mean by mismanaged. So I thought I would just broach this subject with all of you. So one of the things that, and some of you may have heard this before because I have done bits and pieces of this presentation about what OMKM does, but just to kind of summarize what the Office of Mauna Kea Management does, it's really about protecting and preserving the resources. And for us, that's primarily the cultural and natural resources, while at the same time, astronomy continues to operate on the mountain. And this came about back in 2000 when the Board of Regents really felt that the university, they heard what the community was saying about the university just building telescopes but ignoring the other aspects of Mauna Kea, which is really the other resources. So when we were established in the year 2000, the Board of Regents adopted this new master plan calling for the Office of Mauna Kea Management, together with two community groups called the Mauna Kea Management Board and Kahuku Mauna Council, made up of members from the Native Hawaiian community. And our task and the basic premise of the new master plan was that Mauna Kea is to be a community-based management. It's not the university making decisions on its own as to how the mountain is managed, but it has the direct participation of the community, and they have a say into what happens on the mountain. So back in 2000, we were tasked to managing the resources. Well, we didn't really know what those resources were that we had to protect. So that's the first thing we had to do was to do an inventory of what these resources, identify them, and take an account as to what that baseline information is about the resources. So one of the things we did was we had gotten involved in a inventory of all the cultural resources that primarily the archaeological resources on the mountain. It was a 4-year endeavor, and it cost about $500,000 to do this. But we did the survey of the entire science reserve, which is basically the circle, and the road corridor. And the reason it took so long is that the field season is very short in Mauna Kea. You have only about 2-3 weeks where you feel that the weather is going to be fairly cooperative, and that it would be relatively safe to send people out into the hinterlands. Because in these areas out here, it's all accessible by foot. And oftentimes you don't necessarily have cell phone communication. So, but we did it. We had an archaeological firm that went out and did, and this is what, as a result of this, this is what we know of the archaeological sources on the mountain. And as a result of that survey, we now do annual monitoring. So we visit each of these sites over a 5-year period to assess the condition of these sites, to see if they've been disturbed, whether by natural forces or by human activities. Then the other thing is, of course, the natural resources. And from the biological perspective, the only thing that can really survive on the summit of Mauna Kea are bugs, arthropods. And there is one species of arthropod called the Vecu bug, and it is only found within the summit area of Mauna Kea. And it was listed as a candidate species by the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1999 for potential protection under the Endangered Species Act, either as threatened or endangered. But because we didn't know much about this Vecu bug, other than the fact that it was found on the summit, we started an intense program to start surveying it in conjunction with other individuals in 2002. And to this very day, every year we continue to do surveys of the Vecu bug. And then we also looked at other species of arthropods that live on the summit of Mauna Kea. And there are other species, but not too much was known about it. So we've been doing surveys of those since 2007, as well as invasive species that might have set up house, so to speak, on Mauna Kea. We did a botanical survey. We're doing habitat restoration studies, and now our final group is birds and bats. And we have birds that are found at the lower elevation as well as bats, but there are also seabirds that are found at higher elevations. And so we're in the process of doing surveys for those particular seabirds. They do actually, they spend a lot of time at sea, but they also do nest. They nest in higher elevations on Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and Haleakala. We've done physical studies. We looked at climate. We've done a number of climate studies. We've had to install portable weather stations. As you can see, that doing field work on Mauna Kea has its challenges. Our weather station got buried in snow, and our poor researcher had to go in and dig it up. But that's how deep the snow can get up on Mauna Kea. We've done permafrost studies, which is a very unusual thing for Hawaii, because we're in the tropics, but permafrost does actually exist on the summit of Mauna Kea, and was discovered in the late 70s, 80s. But our research is finding that this permafrost is quickly disappearing because of changes in climate. So we're trying to monitor it, and this probably will disappear, could very well disappear within our lifetime. Okay. Erosion, we're doing erosion studies. We're mapping the whole summit region of Mauna Kea to evaluate erosion over time. And then we're also currently in the process of doing a impact study of commercial tours and visitors. We want to do a capacity study to help us determine what the total number of visitors that Mauna Kea can adequately and safely accommodate, as well as commercial tours. So we do, as a result of our surveys and our studies, we implement management programs. So we do our annual monitoring of bugs. We've been doing that for the Becky bug since 2002 and 2007. We do it every year without failure. We are currently trying to replant the Halepohaku area where the visitor information station is located, and replanting that with native species. In part of that process is we have these community weed pool days where the community comes up and helps us to eradicate. I'm not sure what you actually see. Can you see my cursor here? Anyway, they actually come up and they pull invasive weeds. And we've been noticing over time that once you clear an area, the natural vegetation starts to regenerate on its own, and that's a very hopeful sign. A big concern for us are invasive species, because we have a lot of native species that are not more sensitive to outside species coming in and being more aggressive and actually out competing our native species. Of particular interest are ants. There are no native ants in Hawaii, and some of these ants that do come and invade are very aggressive and can harm the native arthropod biota, some of which are natural pollinators of our plants, including such plants as the silver sword. So we monitor invasive species. We have a very aggressive invasive species plan where to prevent the introduction of invasive species, and what to do when an invasive species is found on our UH property. So for now, right now, the most important thing is all large vehicles, large trucks, carrying, delivering or transporting parcels that are bigger than what you can carry in your hand have to be inspected before you come up to the mountain. So this is our way of trying to prevent the introduction of invasive species to Mauna Kea. Probably the most visible part of our program is the Ranger program. They were established in year 2001. They are there 365 days a year. They start their day at around 7 in the morning and they end their day at 10 o'clock at night. Their main responsibility is to interact with the public and to inform them about the cultural sensitivity of the mountain, the environmental uniqueness of the mountain, as well as to inform them about how to visit Mauna Kea safely. Many people don't realize that when you go from sea level to nearly 14,000 feet, there are some very serious health issues, and that you could actually come down with altitude sickness, which is a life-threatening situation. You may not feel it immediately. We've had conversations with the nurse who works in the emergency at North Hawaii Hospital in the emergency room, where she sees people who have gone up to the mountain who have heart attacks, or some people who have gone scuba diving and gone up the mountain within less than 24 hours. And some of them actually do come down with the symptoms of the bends. So you may not feel it immediately, but you'll feel it when you come off the mountain. So these are situations that people don't realize, that Mauna Kea, as beautiful as it is also very hazardous. They pick up trash, they provide first responder first aid for people who get into trouble. They help with rescue missions for people who get lost, and they remove invasive species. They actually pull up invasive plants that are found above Halipahaku. And then they also do twice annual inspections of all the facilities on the summit for compliance with their conservation district use permits, so that to make sure they're in compliance with their permits for being on the mountain. So that's pretty much what we do, some of our programs. In addition to that, we're community-based managed, so the community has a direct participation in how we manage the mountain, and that is through Kahuku-Mauna and Mauna Kea Management Board. We run all proposed projects, management programs, and other things that we do to manage the mountain. We run it through them first before we actually implement them. The Mauna Kea Management Board currently has decision-making authority over what we call minimal impact projects. So they are informed as to, both Kahuku-Mauna and Mauna Kea Management Board are informed regarding what we are doing on the mountain, what the observatories are proposing to do. Native Hawaiians have access to Mauna Kea 24/7. We do not stop individuals from going up to the mountain, except in the case when we have to close the road due to inclement weather or hazardous conditions. University, while observatories are responsible for their employees, the university is responsible for the safety of the visiting public. All tenants of the mountain have to go through, they have to submit project proposals, and they go through this public vetting process before they can move forward with getting permits from the Department of Land and Natural Resources. And then we comply with other agencies, in particular Department of Land and Natural Resources, which is the landlord. And then of course everything we do has to be in compliance with existing federal, state, and county regulations. So we operate not just independently, but we have a lot of conditions that are put on us in terms of managing Mauna Kea. So, if what I've sort of summarized very quickly is that good or poor management, and if you think that is good management, then OMKM is guilty of good management. The other aspect is I want to talk about how necessity leads to policy. And back in 1960, Hilo was hit with a devastating tsunami, and Hilo at the time was the center for government, social, and economics for the island of Hawaii, and at the sugar and agriculture was the big industry. There was really no tourism to speak of back in the 60s on the Big Island. So in 1963, the Big Island was still had not recovered from the tsunami, and this individual by the name of Mitsuo Akiyama was looking for ways to jumpstart the economy. And then he had heard about the possibility of doing astronomy on Mauna Kea. So together with the Board of Supervisors for the County of Hawaii, which is a precursor for the County Council, as well as the state legislature, both of them urged the governor and all elected officials to build a road to the summit of Mauna Kea and to establish Mauna Kea, the summit of Mauna Kea, for doing astronomy. So it was a community government effort to get astronomy up there. And in particular, the impetus and the initiative came from this island. At that time in 1964, Governor Johnny Burns was our governor, and he was very visionary, and he realized that the future jobs were not going to be was going to be moving away from manual labor. He could see that jobs are going to be moving away from ag, and that there's going to be a need for skilled jobs, technicians and scientists. And he realized how Hawaii had all these natural resources. And he looked to research, developing research industries as a way to help the economy of the islands. It would really help to bring in offshore monies and to help generate economic development for the state of Hawaii. The two areas that he really looked at that time was oceanography and astronomy. Those two areas are what the state of Hawaii certainly now excels in both oceanography at the University of Hawaii and astronomy. So what he did was, it wasn't something that just the state alone could do. So he called upon the university and all resources, public and private, in the public and private sectors, and he called upon them and he says, go forward and establish research enterprise in the state of Hawaii. And that's what happened. And today, Hawaii excels in research and oceanography, and is certainly for astronomy. So here we are in the 2020. We have a number of telescopes on Mauna Kea. There are a total of 13. 12 of them are on the summit region. And a question we oftentimes get is, why do you have to have so many telescopes? And the reason is that there are billions of stars and celestial objects in the universe, and no one telescope can possibly study every single one of them. And you have a number of telescopes, and most of the most common telescope type on Mauna Kea are optical telescopes, but they don't all do the same thing. What they have in common is a mirror. But what distinguishes these telescopes is that they have instrumentation that they can attach to the mirrors, and these instrumentations are designed to do different kinds of analyses. But by having these telescopes here in close proximity to each other, they're able to efficiently and effectively collaborate on scientific studies. And for example, a Nobel Prize was granted a few years ago that involved Keck, Gemini, and Canada-France-Hawaii telescope. Their data collectively helped to contribute to a Nobel Prize winning study that the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. But it took these three telescopes to do different kinds of analyses to help to provide the data to come up with that theory. And of course, when we have things that are unusual, like what happened about a year or so ago was that object that came into our solar system from outside of our solar system, and it was called named Oumuamua, and they believe, and it was actually Haleakala, the telescope on Haleakala, that noticed it. The telescopes on Mauna Kea were all able to, they were notified by Haleakala, they turned their telescopes to this object, and they believed that this object was a visiting asteroid, and it didn't stay in our solar system for very long, but they were able to study it very quickly and efficiently. So these telescopes were all built at very minimal cost to the state of Hawaii. To build one of these, you're talking millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build a telescope. And certainly it's collectively, it's about $80 million to run these particular telescopes a year. The state of Hawaii could never afford to do this. So what they did was, and when a telescope wanted to come to Hawaii, they were allowed to do so, but they were also told that you have to give the state of Hawaii, through the university, time on their telescopes. And that was how the university was able to build up its reputation for one of the top centers for astronomical research in the country and the world. So because of this, Hawaii is now the global center for astronomy in the entire world. So you may hear about this $1 a year sublease rate that is given in exchange for the viewing time. Well, you have to have some form of monetary value to make a sublease valid. And so each of these telescopes, yes, their sublease calls for $1 a year, but in exchange, the state of Hawaii gets time on these telescopes, and it brings in research dollars to the state, which also contributes to the economy. So some of you may have seen this economic impact study analysis that was done in 2014. And the total economic impact of astronomy in Hawaii is about $168 million. $91 million is on this island alone. So you can see that over half of the economic impact is felt on this island. And it is built on a total expenditure of about $59 million on the island of Hawaii. This in turn generates an additional, in addition to the astronomy jobs, it generates an additional 800 jobs for the island of Hawaii. So astronomy has a significant impact to this island. And one aspect about astronomy is that it's not dependent on tourism. And so we're now in this COVID-19 situation where tourism is basically non-existent, and it's affected a lot of jobs and a lot of other smaller industries on the island, but astronomy continues to function. So here we are. What we do is OMKM, Office of Mauna Kea Management, does resource management. But on the other side, you have development policy. And OMKM is not involved in development policy. And what I mean by development policy, we are not involved in how many telescopes are built, when are they going to build, and when are they going to come down. Those are policy decisions that are made between the state of Hawaii, the community, and the University of Hawaii. These three entities work together in determining what happens with astronomy on Mauna Kea. We just do the resource management. And so I'm not sure, and I don't have proof of this, but I think a lot of the confusion comes in when it comes to mismanaging the mountain has to do with telescope development on Mauna Kea. But those are issues that started way back in the 60s, and they need to be addressed not just by the university alone, but it will take the community and the state of Hawaii to make the determination of what happens on Mauna Kea. So, and that just summarizes everything. And I hope when you hear people say that Mauna Kea is mismanagement, it would be really helpful to know what do they mean by mismanagement. And it would be helpful for us to know what they mean by mismanagement, because if it has to do with resource mismanagement, then we would like to know that we can make any corrections to address those changes. When it comes to policy, those have to be addressed at a higher authority above OMKM. And that's it in a nutshell. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Does anyone have any questions? No?
I do. I just couldn't find the mute button. Hi, this is Brenda. Thank you for that presentation. That was helpful. You know, the folks coming up and skiing when we get snow on Mauna Kea, does that damage any of the archaeological sites? Or I know nothing about any of that. I've been up there.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Last years I've lived here, so.
That's a very good question. So most of the snow play takes place in the what they call the astronomy precinct, because this is where the highest part of Mauna Kea is. It's right, actually right here outside of the astronomy precinct. The astronomy precinct.
We're not seeing that anymore. Your map? No, we lost your map.
Oh, you want me to share this again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see that? No?
Yep. Now we can.
Okay. So the astronomy precinct is an artificial area that was termed by the university, and it contains all of the telescopes on Mauna Kea. including if the TMT is built, which is going to be built somewhere out here. But it does not include another telescope called the Very Long Baseline Array, which is located here. But there are no archaeological sites where people snowplay, because most of the snow will take place right in this particular area here. You don't usually find it out here, which is the lower plateau area. You don't find people snowplaying in this area. But because, and there are no archaeological sites, so there's no potential for harming any of the archaeological sites in this area. And because the snow is deep enough, when they do snow play, they're not really harming the actual ground itself either.
Okay, I have two more questions. The road going up, it was blocked, and again, I know very little about all the politics and all the who's in what and who's doing what. I actually didn't get engaged with it at all. But they're able to block the road to get access to the mountain, the protesters, and that was okay? I mean, does somebody own the road? So that would be one of my questions. The second question would be how come it's taking so long to break down the telescopes? I mean, even my husband asked me the other day, he says, you know, if they just move those others, then maybe the people wouldn't be so unhappy and have a little bit more faith.
Yeah, very good question. Well, can they block the road? Obviously they have, and so they can, but, and this time around, they blocked it, you know, at the junction, at the Saddle Road Junction, where the Mauna Kea Access Road meets the Saddle Road. That's where they blocked it this time. And the road that leads up to Mauna Kea is actually a Department of Transportation road. Technically, it goes to Hawaiian Homelands, and it was originally Hawaiian Homelands Road, and the state is still in the process of negotiating with Hawaiian Homelands over the compensation for that road. And the transfer was made quite a while ago. It's just that they haven't gone through the final steps of compensating Department of Hawaiian Homelands for that section of the road. Now, whether or not they're allowed to do that, I think you'll hear a lot of people say that it's not legal. You cannot block a public highway. And the road to Mauna Kea is a public highway, according to the definition of the Hawaii Revised Statutes. Technically, you can't do that, but there were law enforcement issues that need to be addressed between the county and the state as to how, about clearing up the road, and it eventually did go away, right? Now, the decommissioning, and Laura, if it's possible to send people that latest article we did in Oshirase on decommissioning?
I sure will. I'll send it over to Maurice and he can share it with his members.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, yeah, so decommissioning is not a simple matter. It sounds like it's a real simple matter. You just go up there and take the building down. It's actually more difficult and more complex than putting up a telescope, because not only do we need to work with the community in terms of how much is to be removed, everything above ground or everything below ground, and to what degree the site needs to be restored. So you could try to restore it to the condition it was before construction took place, or you could restore it to arthropod habitat, or you can just leave it and just restore it to even grade to what it is now. So those, and anything in between those. So it takes a lot of consultation with the community as to what they would like to see in terms of what is removed and how it's restored. Now, the Department of Land and Natural Resources also requires that we do an environmental assessment. So once we go through trying to make determinations as to the various degrees of removal and restoration, the property, in this case, there's two that are being decommissioned, Caltech's a millimeter telescope and the UH Hilo Hokukea telescope will have to go through an environmental assessment, and that could take up to a year or so. Okay. So the designing will take a while. Designing meaning, how do we remove and how to restore. Then you have to go through an environmental assessment, and then then we have to apply for a conservation district use permit from the Department of Land and Natural Resources. And then the Board of Land and Natural Resources will likely be the one to make a decision whether or not to grant a permit to remove the telescope and to what degree they'd like to see it removed and restored. So it's for this Caltech millimeter telescope, it's the first to undergo this process. They go through, they follow a process called a decommissioning plan. It's quite involved, and it could take up to 4 years for it to be fully removed and restored. Mauna Kea just started its decommissioning process, and it looks like the current schedule is for it to be removed by 2023. Caltech, if everything goes well with that project, would be the latter part of 2022. So it's just really an involved process of decommissioning. It's unfortunate, that's just the way it is, yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm pretty naive about all of this and haven't got involved, but the two things that you just shared, and not that I'm holding you accountable for that, is that no wonder they don't want a telescope to be built up there. So where's the trust? If it takes that long to get one to break down, why is that so complicated, and what is taking so long? That is, how are they moving through the process? That sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare, for one. And then two is that if the road, if a deal was made, then why isn't the state just paying for what they said that they were going to pay for use of the land? And so that seems to be a lack of a trust thing too. And again, I just have to say, I'm not involved. I just, based on what you just shared, it sounds very government-y. Bureaucracy at its best.
You're absolutely right. And because, well, with respect to the road, it's they have to work it out with the commissioners. Department of Hawaiian Homelands has commissioners that are appointed by the governor, and they have to work it out. The state needs to work it out with the commissioners and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands administration regarding how much they have to, what is the value of that land. And the state is not, it cannot provide money, so they have to find something to exchange it with. So, and so that can also be a negotiating thing that could take a while, because some people will want this set of lands and other group will want, well, we want this lands, or so it's not like one person says, okay, you're going to get this land. So it's a process, and they've been working on it for some time, when I understand. Now, granted, yes, that it's taking a long time to decommission, and if we could, we would just tell the telescope, go dismantle it. But because Mauna Kea is so sensitive, we've got cultural issues, we've got environmental issues, and as well as operating telescopes on the mountain, people visiting the mountain, that you just can't send up a construction crew and say, go take this down, because we have to worry about people not getting hurt while construction is going on. But the main part is, what does the community really want to see in terms of what is removed, to what degree they like to see things removed, and how they like to see it restored. There are different opinions as to whether or not some of the not the dome, but some of the support structures could be used for public purposes. You could remove everything, but say, there's no restroom facilities up there, there's no ranger station up there, there's no shelter for public. Can they be used for public purposes? So those are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration. That's why the public participation is real critical as to how these things need to proceed. And it's just trying to be sensitive to the wants and needs of the community, as opposed to the university just making decisions on their own and say, we're going to do it this way. And then you have everybody coming after the university saying, well, you never asked us. Right. It's a real different, it's a challenging situation, Brenda, but I understand. Yeah. If we could, we would just go up there and just take them all down. But
yeah, politics at its best.
Yeah.
back to bureaucracy. Thank you for sharing. Again,
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm not pushing that one way or the other. That was just some questions because I know very little, cannot speak to it. So,
Yeah.
but thank you for sharing.
Oh yeah, you're welcome.
I have two simple questions, if it's okay.
Sure.
So, I mean, I've only lived here about 9 years. So I'm just struck because I see that you're going by OMKM, but then underneath it, Mauna Kea is combined into one word. So I'm a little bit confused as to why that is. And my second question, which, you know, at your convenience, you keep referring to the community. So there's the state, there's the university, and there's the community informing policy. And when you had a certain slide that showed those three, you know, the three kind of logos and icons, there was clearly an icon representing, quote, the community. So right there, beautiful, in the middle. So I'm curious, is when you're referencing, quote, the community, is it a particular organization that has this logo and identity that has a structure to it that we can look into, or is it this concept of community buy-in? Because it could be two very different entities or concepts.
Sure. Well, I was just looking for something on the web that would represent the community, and I found this. It's not a specific organization. It's just a community in general. And because Mauna Kea is on the island Hawaii, there's this concept called kuleana, meaning that people on the Big Island wouldn't go to Kauai and tell people on Kauai how to run their business. So same thing, they don't appreciate people from other islands telling people on the Big Island how to do their business. So this concept of kuleana, so this community concept is primarily looking at the Big Island community because Mauna Kea is in their backyard, so to speak. So when we say community, it really means, okay, how many telescopes do you feel should be on Mauna Kea? That needs to be taken out to the community in general and to get feedback from them and to come up with some kind of consensus. Now, your other question was about Mauna Kea, and that's a very good question. So historically, Mauna Kea was spelled, you know, Hawaiians didn't have a written language. It was all oral, okay? But when they went to print, Mauna Kea was two words, Mauna and Kea, and you could interpret it in different ways. It could be White Mountain or Mauna Kea, which has to do with the mythology behind Mauna Kea. But then Larry Kimura, who is a professor of language here, Hawaiian language at the University of Hawaii, had done some research and listening to people speaking the language, you know, some of the elders speaking the language, and he believed that when you use a term in Hawaiian language as a noun, that you spell it as one word. So Mauna Kea is not an adjective. If it's an adjective, if you really were referring to a white mountain, then you would separate them. But Mauna Kea is a proper noun. It is the name of a place. So he believed that it should be one word. So we are now following Larry's interpretation and his guidance on how you use proper names. The spelling of proper names is one word. So a lot of things like Mauna Loa would be one word, Halepohaku would be one word and not separate.
Thank you. That really helped. Going back to the community involvement, I guess the question I have is, how is the community involved, or what buy-in? What's the avenue of that? Because from my understanding, it comes down to policies being discussed at county council meetings and the public going in to give testimony. Is there a way beside that one avenue in which the community is engaged in the decision-making process, other than just, hey, you got an issue with how we've decided things happening here?
So one way is that the Mauna Kea Management Board has public meetings. So they're noticed. They follow the sunshine method for announcing and posting meetings, and the public is welcome. Of course, we have to do everything virtually now because of COVID, but the public is more than welcome to attend these meetings. They get to provide testimony. The way the Mauna Kea Management Board handled it was that the people in the audience could actually have interactive discussions with the board members, as opposed to a lot of these public meetings. He says, okay, you can say your thing now and that's it, and they don't get to participate. So that's a little bit different how the MKMB, we call it MKMB as an acronym, how they work with the community. They also do for some of these bigger projects, such as a 30-meter telescope and the decommissioning project, is that they would actually hold public open houses where people can come in, provide their comments, and give input that way. And they can always certainly communicate with the office and as a way to give their input on what's happening on Mauna Kea. Yeah. And if you're interested in being on the Mauna Kea Management Board, then you should certainly let the Chancellor of UH Hilo know that you're an interested party and you would like to serve on the Mauna Kea Management Board.
Hey, Stephanie, it's Keith. Thank you very much for all you do. I do have a quick question. I understand there's some possible proposed changes for management of the mountain. I'm curious as to how that's going to affect you and your Office of Mauna Kea Management.
Well, that's a really good question, Keith, because we're not sure. But all I do know is that this is something that the university was doing to address what they're hearing out there, is that the university needs to do something transformative to help change public perception, or to provide a more meaningful management structure for the public to understand. So the key part of this whole structure is that they're going to have one person to which all Mauna Kea related matters he would sort of oversee all Mauna Kea things, including the work that OMKM does. Now, the Office of Mauna Kea Management, OMKM itself, the acronym will probably disappear, and it'll probably come under what they call the Center for Mauna Kea Stewardship. And that's going to be a name change. But in terms of what actually gets done, shouldn't be changing dramatically. It's just the organizational structure and how things are processed will probably be changed. And the other thing is that, so I've been with the university for 20 years, and I think it's time to say aloha. So I will be retiring sometime this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh my.
I had a question, actually a couple questions, but real quick, as far as the archaeological sites, I mean, looking at just the few pictures that you had, I see like groups of rocks together, and I wonder, I mean, I don't mean any disrespect, because I mean, to me, it just looks like a group of rocks together. They could have been there haphazardly from anybody passing by or messing around. Like, what goes into determining that it's an archaeological find or site?
Oh, okay. I'm not an archaeologist. However, there is state law that says that anything that's there for 50 years or more are considered historic properties. Okay. So a lot of the shrines were there for considered ancient times. Then you have shrines or stacks of rocks that are more modern. Now that's an interesting concept, because you'll have some members of the Hawaiian community who feel that the construction of those were not done properly. Normally, there's protocols involved, or sometimes people will just stack rocks because they think it's fun. And Kahukumana was real concerned about copycat behavior. So you don't normally see archaeological sites close to the road. Historic properties. You don't see them close to the road. They pretty much avoided archaeological sites when they put that road in. but it's a lot easier to stack rocks closer to the road than to walk 100 yards away and put your shrine or your ahu that's out of sight from the public. And these stacks of rocks started showing up. They weren't there prior to TMT, but after TMT decided they wanted to come to Hawaii and they were going to begin construction, a lot of these rocks have started, these stacks of rocks started appearing all over the place. And so some members of the Hawaiian community feel that it's improper. Others feel that it's an expression of their culture, but they're not protected by state law. You cannot harm a historic property, something that has been deemed 50 years and older. You could be slapped with a $10,000 fine for disturbing historic property. Anything that's new, they don't have any statutory conditions against that. There's no fines that can be administered for that. So it's a toughie. It's a real toughie, but Kahuku Mauna has taken this position that basically everyone should respect the current regulations, and there are regulations about, not specifically about stacking rocks, but there are regulations about using natural resources to build things. It's a DLNR rule. You cannot disturb the landscape. So you can't just go around picking up rocks and start building things. You'd have to have permission to do that. And so we've just followed some of the examples and the policies of Department of Land and Natural Resources. So if anyone wants to build a stack of rocks, and they really need to come and get a permit from us. And that way, once we know that it was put up with deliberation and purpose, then we could then, if something were to happen to it, then we can then inform the family about your site has been harmed or dismantled, and then they can come and take care of matters.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, it's a real challenging situation.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah.
I have a question on the permafrost. Is there a permafrost area on Mauna Loa as well as Mauna Kea? And, how large is it, more or less? And then if it's going to disappear in our lifetimes, I assume that, due to global warming, that the train is on the track, that it is definitely going to disappear.
Yeah, there was, it's shrinking in size. It's about maybe not quite half the size of when it was first discovered, but it's definitely shrinking. And it'll be interesting what it does to the whole summit structure. They're only usually found in two main areas on the mountain, and they're in the bottom of cinder cones. One is Pu'uveku, and the other one is Haukea, which is in the Natural Area Reserve. So nothing is built on them right now, but the reason for that is because for some reason, cold air, it will sink, cold air sinks. And so the coldest air tends to sink and settles into some of these cinder cones, and that's how permafrost.
Okay. And is it on Mauna, are there permafrost areas on Mauna Loa as well?
That I don't know. I don't think so. I don't believe so. But don't quote. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Last minute questions? Okay, we are officially past our hour. So with that, I will lead us into the four-way test. And thank you very much, Stephanie, for
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for joining us. So other things we think, do, or say. First, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendship? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, Have fun.
Have fun.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Steph, wait, let me take a picture of you.
Oh, golly.
Okay, here you go.
My hair is a mess today.
It's okay.
The problem with Zoom, you don't really care what you look like anymore.
I know.